All right, let's talk about, before we wrap up, this label of Israel by Amnesty International as an apartheid state. Amnesty International put out this tweet that was pretty bold. I was surprised. I thought maybe this report would come out and would be like, we think Israel may be committing crimes that could amount to apartheid. And what they say here in this tweet: apartheid is deprivation, apartheid is segregation, apartheid is fragmentation, apartheid is dispossession. Israel's apartheid over Palestinians is a crime against humanity. That's a bold statement. I have a write-up here from Brett Wilkins, initially at Common Dreams and then reprinted on the blog at antiwar.com, titled "New Amnesty Report Outlines True Extent of Israel's Apartheid Regime." He writes, Palestine advocates on Tuesday welcome a new report in which Amnesty International became the largest in a growing list of human rights organizations to explicitly call Israel's policies and actions against Palestinians apartheid. The report, entitled "Israel's Apartheid Against Palestinians: Cruel System of Domination and Crime Against Humanity," shows how the theft of Palestinian land and homes, forced transfers, unlawful killings, severe restrictions on movements, and other human rights violations are all components of a system which amounts to apartheid under international law. Our report reveals the true extent of Israel's apartheid regime, whether they live in Gaza, East Jerusalem, and the rest of the West Bank, or Israel itself. Palestinians are treated as inferior racial group and systematically deprived of their rights. Amnesty International Secretary General said in a statement, "We found that Israel's cruel policies of segregation, dispossession, and exclusion across the territories under its control clearly amount to apartheid. The international community has an obligation to act." And so this is important. Not that Amnesty International is the international morality police and we should say now, they say it is and so it is. No, it has been this way for a long time. And for a long time, these groups were, somewhat involved in the cover up of that apartheid and doing a lot of, both sidesing of every situation. Well, the Israelis aren't great to the Palestinians, but sometimes Palestinians are violent. Even they live under, military occupation and live under military courts in a language that they don't speak. We're going to tell you that the real situation is here, that it's a both sides situation. No, that's not what's been happening, and these groups are finally coming out and saying it. Of course, B'Tselem, the Israeli human rights group, was first, and then Human Rights Watch, and now Amnesty International. Hopefully this contributes to the flood of groups naming Israel as an apartheid state. The real advantage to it that I see is that gives everybody in the US and the West the political clearance to say it without being called anti-Semitic. And, this helps to not hamper the message so much. It's absolutely true. And it's not anti-Semitic to call Israel an apartheid state. However, that doesn't mean that apologists for the Israeli state won't say that it is anti-Semitic. And so if somebody doesn't know a lot about it, they hear that and then they say, "Oh, well, I don't want to agree with that guy because, he might not like Jews." But if your immediate response is, "Come on, man, this is what Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International you said. You really think this is about the Jews, or do you think it's about the oppression of the Palestinians?" That I think is pretty disarming to people because they've heard of Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch before, and these groups saying it sound like the kind of things that, when your senator says it, you have to believe them and everything. So I do think these things are important in moving the needle. And again, it shouldn't be, right? But it is. And so we take this as a victory, I think. Now, a couple examples of the Israel apartheid in Palestine is the killing of Omar Assad. I might be pronouncing his name a little bit wrong. It's not Assad like Bashar al-Assad, but Asaad. And I guess Omar was affectionately known in the community as Al-Buhani. And he was an 80-year-old man who was arrested not too far outside of Ramallah by Israeli troops, left like on the ground for several hours, not given any kind of medical care. They blindfolded him. I also read that he was given some kind of gag, or they put something in his mouth. They also handcuffed him with plastic handcuffs. Of course, that's all you need for somebody when they're 80 years old. And so they left him there for a long time, and he apparently had a heart attack and died. And so when the soldiers came back, they saw him laying there. They said, "Oh, we thought he was asleep," and just left him. Didn't do anything to report that he was a dead body, didn't try to provide any kind of medical care or anything like that. Left him for dead. Some younger Palestinians came by, found him, took him to the hospital, and he's of course dead. And that's the end of his life, killed by the Israeli soldiers. And so there's no real expectation for justice. However, I believe 3 people were reprimanded for this within the defense unit that carried out this atrocity against this poor old man. A 78-year-old Palestinian man who was hit with a tow truck succumbed from his wounds and died. He was 75, not 78. Haj Suleiman, I'm guessing is what his name was known by for locals. I'm not going to actually try to pronounce his name because I'll butcher it. There was initial reports that the truck swerved to hit him. The truck was contracted with the Israeli forces. There are other reports that he was like standing in the road trying to like kind of protest the truck coming to tow whatever it was going to tow, and the tow truck intentionally hit him. Either way, no justice for the poor elderly man who was struck and killed by the tow truck. And again, another example of apartheid. Last thing I got here on that is we now know for sure that Israel's Shin Bet, which is their internal intelligence agency, was sending threatening text messages to Palestinians who they geo-tracked, or at least, they claim to have geo-tracked as attending protests around the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and I'm guessing also in Sheikh Jarrah last May. And this led to the eventual conflict between Gaza and Israel. There are major protests there. Israel carried out raids of the Al-Aqsa Mosque and everything like that. Of course, the text messages say you were involved in a violent protest. I think they say like, be warned, we're coming to get you, and things like that. Very ominous and threatening things when, really by and large, the Palestinians were peaceful in this and the Israelis were the aggressors. And this is just cruel, very creepy apartheid behavior by the Israeli government here. I mean, imagine if the Trump administration had been sending text messages to protesters of the Black Lives Matter movement saying that, I guess Trump's FBI saying, we know you were at this protest, be warned, we're coming to get you. I think people would be very concerned and offended by that. The Israeli Prime Minister vows no peace talks with the Palestinians. Of course, why would you attempt to talk to the people that you have a military occupation over? So, just further confirming that we're going to see this occupation drag on and on. Also from the Israeli Prime Minister, this written up by Jason Ditz at antiwar.com. Expect war soon in either Gaza or Lebanon. Why he would be saying that, I don't know, unless it's, kind of for like the political reason, the rally around the flag effect, because things aren't going great in Israel, and that's mainly because the NSO group's Pegasus spyware. This country has been sanctioned, it's losing a lot of money, but it's been implicated in spying on activists, journalists, politicians, even American diplomats all around the world. Recently, a top Human Rights Watch investigator was targeted with the Pegasus spyware. Her name is Lama Fakin, and she's a U.S. Lebanese citizen, and she is the director of crisis and conflicts with Human Rights Watch. She has been involved in several countries that have had the Pegasus spyware sold to. It's unclear who actually carried out the hack on her phone, but it was done through the zero-click exploit, which means that they were able to exploit this woman, who again is a high-ranking member of Human Rights Watch, and get into her phone without her actually even clicking on a link or anything like that. They simply like get you a missed call on WhatsApp or something like that, and that's actually enough to get into your phone. Now, one thing that I guess is assumed when this article is talking about her is that, you know, they're looking for her messages or, you know, targeting her, when it's not so clear to me that that's necessarily always the case. Just because, you know, she was involved in Kazakhstan or whatever, doesn't mean that it's maybe, you know, Kazakhstan that did this. If she was, say, communicating or somehow involved, had the documents sent to her of the potential Human Rights Watch report looking into Israeli apartheid, maybe it was the Israelis who looked into her phone, didn't necessarily do it to the author of the report because that would be too obvious. But, you know, if you do it to her, and then you could get the documents without it, again, being so clear who exactly is doing this. Now, one example where it does seem clear who's carrying it out, and that is in El Salvador, where 35 people in total, but 22 journalists have been had their phones and things infected with the Pegasus spyware. And this was all confirmed, I believe, through the Toronto-based Citizens Lab. This has been going on in the Middle East as well, particularly in Jordan and Bahrain, where women's rights activists were targeted. This from The Intercept here. The report documents how Pegasus can have particularly egregious impact on women who are disproportionately vulnerable to the weaponization of personal information when governments seek to intimidate, harass, publicly smear dissidents. Is the case of a renowned human rights defender who works in Bahrain with the advocacy group SALAM for democracy and human rights. Her phone was hacked at least 8 times between August and November of 2019 with Pegasus spyware, according to the researchers. The privacy violations extended what was reported as described as brutal harassment by the Bahraini authorities on May 26, 2017. The report said Bahrain's National Security Agency summoned her to the police station. Interrogators subjected her to verbal abuse and physically beat and sexually assaulted her. They threatened her with rape if she did not halt her human rights activism. Upon release, she was immediately taken to the hospital. And so you have a woman who was threatened with rape by her government, and then you sold that government the ability to spy on her, and they did. This is really disturbing stuff that we're talking about here. This also, again, happened in Jordan and the UAE, targeting of women. Also in Saudi Arabia, they had access to this. I guess the Israelis, for whatever reason, the defense ministry cut it off. But after a personal call between Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, MBS, and then Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, that was returned and turned back on. And so it just shows, I guess, what kind of authoritarians both MBS and Netanyahu are, but also how these governments, even when maybe it was flagged that there was something inappropriate going on here, were able to regain access to this technology fairly quickly. Last story on the NSO group stuff, and this isn't so much about the NSO group, but another Israeli spyware firm has a very similar product called RAIN, all in capitals, REIGN. And the company that made this technology or this spyware is Quadream, all one word, QUA, capital DREAM. And is apparently a smaller, lower profile Israeli firm that has a lot of crossover employment with the NSO group, and again has developed a very similar zero-click technology that allows people to break into and spy on iPhones. They say that this technology, or the reports from multiple sources, say that this technology was given to the governments of Saudi Arabia, Mexico, Indonesia, and Singapore. All right, last two stories here. Three stories. Israel is reportedly planning to sell its Iron Dome missile defense system to the UAE. This, of course, comes after the UAE has been carried the targets of several attacks recently by the Houthis, but also some of the attacks were claimed not by the Houthis, but by an Iraqi group, saying that it was because of the the UAE support for the war against the Houthis in Yemen. But nonetheless, this most recent attack apparently coming from Iraq and not from Yemen against the UAE. This sale by Israel isn't about security or anything like that. It's about propping up authoritarian governments around the Middle East, which is absolutely hilarious because one of Israel's reasons that the U.S. always has to support it in the Middle East in any of its disputes with any other countries is because Israel is the sole democracy in the Middle East. And yet, it kind of makes sure that remains the case by given so many weapons and so much technology like the Pegasus spyware to all these other authoritarian governments that oppress their people. Israel is apparently working on and will begin deploying within the next year a new laser wall or iron beam laser-based missile defense system. Very interesting, I guess, if Israel can get something like this to work, assuming it doesn't take an absurd amount of energy in order to down a drone or something like, or a missile with one of these systems, and they could do it with, some kind of accuracy. This could really take the financial burden off of shooting down the rockets. You do have a situation right now in like Saudi Arabia, in Israel, where the rockets that are being used to target Saudi Arabia and Israel are not very expensive and could be produced in a lot of quantity by the Houthis and by Hamas in Gaza. But at the same time, that they could be shot down by the Iron Dome or by the Patriot missile system, but those missiles are very expensive in themselves, and also they produce a good amount of debris to go up there and shoot down these other rockets and things like that. And so that would maybe alleviate some of those problems, and is maybe a tilt back towards the side of the world's superpowers in their ability to take on insurgencies if they are able to come up with a low cost way to shoot down cheap drones and rockets. Last up here is from Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com. Israel participates in U.S.-led naval drills alongside Saudi Arabia and Oman. These are the International Maritime Exercise 2022 and Cutlass Expanse 2022. They're going to run from January 31st to February 17th and involve 60 countries. The note between Saudi Arabia, Oman, and Israel is significant as these countries all don't have long-standing ties and military drills together, so it's kind of unique that the U.S. is getting all these countries together. All right, that's where I'm wrapping up the show for today, everyone.